Welcome to another video. This is Jennifer McGuire, and today I am sharing with you two fun fold cards. Now, I just went live with Gina from Gina K Designs on my channel here. If you missed that live, I encourage you to check it out. I will link to it up here on the top right and at the end of this video. In that live, both Gina and I shared a couple of fun fold designs each, but we really just focused on the card bases. In this video, I'll show you those card bases again and all of the other details on my card examples. So be sure to check out that live if you haven't done so already. So my first card example features a fun fold pop-up on the front. But first, let's get all of our pieces ready. I'll start by creating those snowflakes. I'm using my Gina K Fuse foiling system, and I need to get out a carrier sheet. Now, I tend to lose my carrier sheets, so I keep them in a little zipper pouch so I don't have to worry about losing them in the future. You can buy extra carrier sheets, and the machine does come with one. I will also be using Gina K white Poly-Glaze sheets. Now, these sheets have a special coating on them that allows you to get solid foiling. So I will use this to create foiled die cuts. Now, I prefer to die cut first, then foil, but you could do the other way around too. So I'm cutting into kind of the shiny side of the Poly-Glaze. And here you can see I have some fun snowflakes. This is the Snowflake Trio from Gina K Designs. It's a much older die set, but I love it. Onto that slick side of the Poly-Glaze, I'm placing my foil. So the pretty side of the foil is facing up, and so is the slick side of the Poly-Glaze. I put that in my carrier sheet and I'm running it through my fuse machine. I'm using Gina K Brilliant Blue foil. This is one of my favorites, and it just foils wonderfully. So now I have these blue foil die cuts, and that foil will not come off, and it'll match the background that I'm about to make. So I'll create 3 different snowflakes this way. I'm not sure which snowflake I'm going to use on this card, so I'm creating all 3. While that goes through my fuse machine, I'll prep my next step, and this is the background. I'm using a Poly-Glaze winter snow sheet. This is white paper with that white Poly-Glaze printed in snowflakes, and wherever there's Poly-Glaze, the foil will stick. So I have the pretty side of the Poly-Glaze facing up towards the camera, and the pretty side of the foil facing up towards the camera also. I will put that into the carrier sheet and run it through my fuse, and we'll end up with beautiful results. Poly-Glaze is a unique material, and it's kind of like a white toner. Usually you foil with black toner. I like to think of this as white toner. It's not really, but that's kind of how it behaves. So anywhere that Poly-Glaze is printed, the foiling will stick. And look at the beautiful detail results. It's outstanding. I will be using that background on my card, but I didn't want this leftover foil to go to waste. One of the best ways you can use this leftover foil is with that solid white Poly-Glaze. Once again, this is the same kind of paper that I use to create my snowflake die cuts. I'll take that solid Poly-Glaze and put it so the pretty side's facing the camera and the pretty side of my leftover foil is facing the camera. I will run that through my fuse, and that will bond that foil to that Poly-Glaze sheet. So it'll pick up all of that foil, and now we have the reverse. So I'm not using that on today's card, but I didn't want that to go to waste, and I can save it for a future card. I will be using the piece on the left. I wanted this to have a blue background, so I'm applying Gina K Designs dye ink over the entire piece. I am using the blue raspberry color first and putting kind of a light to medium application of ink. You can do any inking you want over this foiling. The foil will resist the ink. You just wipe the extra ink off with a dry cloth when you're done. In this way, it looks like you did foiling on a colored cardstock. But really, I used the white Poly-Glaze sheets. Now, I wanted it to be a bit darker around the edges, so I'm coming in with blue denim ink just to give that bit of shading. And after I've done that on all of the edges, I will come in with just a bit of in the navy, which is even darker, and that will make the edges even darker. I like to go like higher contrast than I want in the end because these inks will soften as they dry and give us a very nice blend. So it's better to start with darker inks than you want in the final result. I love the look of this navy on the edge of that blue raspberry background. And of course, all those snowflakes are super sparkly in that brilliant blue foil. Next, I'll just trim a little bit off of all four sides so that I can add this onto a white note card that is 4¼ by 5½ inches. Now that we have our blue foiled snowflake and our blue foiled background, let's work on that white fun fold pop-up design. This is really cool and gives amazing dimension, and I'm hoping you try it on one of your cards. I'll be using the Gina K Designs Master Layouts 10 die set. I love Master Layout dies from Gina because there are so many useful dies in a set, and often these sets have layering dies that layer very close together, so you get a nice fine mat. Now the smallest of the dies in this set have the faux stitching on the inside edge, and then the slightly larger die does not, and that will create the mat. I'll be using almost all of the dies in this set today for my 2 different cards. For the Fun Fold pop-up feature on this card, I'll be using those 2 label dies on the right. I'll start with the larger label die that doesn't have the faux stitching, and I die cut 2 from heavyweight white cardstock. I need to do a score line right down the center, so what I chose to do was measure and find the halfway point between those 2 little corners at the top. And this is 3 inches wide, so the ½ inch would be 1½ inches. So I'll make a little mark there. And I'll do the same thing on the other label. So I'm measuring from corner to corner on this label, putting a pencil line down the center. There are a few ways to do this, but I found this the best. I then took this to my scoreboard, and I'll score right where that pencil line is. And this will score it directly in half. Now you could use other shaped dies for this, but I think label dies like this work really well for this fun fold pop-up. Now I used very heavyweight cardstock to create this. If you want less pop-up, you can use a lighter weight cardstock like an 80-pound. You'll see later that my pop-up really gives a lot of dimension. It's completely up to you. I have 2 folded pieces here, and I'll glue them to the top center of our card so that the fold lines meet in the middle. So I'm putting glue on the back half of both of these. I'll flip them over and place them down together so that the fold line meets in the middle. And then I will press it down, and this is what it looks like so far. So you've got these little flaps that stick out. Looks a little weird right now, but I promise it'll come together nicely. Now I have one of the labels that has the faux stitching on the inside. So this is slightly smaller than the labels we just glued onto our card. I put a pencil mark at the halfway point, and I'm cutting this in half. Now this step is optional. I'm putting glue on the back of these and putting them onto the 2 pieces that are popping up on our card, so on those 2 flaps that stick up. This is just to give detail. You do not need to put this on here. If you want to put less layers on your card, you could definitely skip those. But I like that nice finished look it gives with that white mat and then the white faux stitching on the front of it. Next, I cut 2 pieces of heavyweight white cardstock to be 1 inch by 2 inches. You could use lighter weight if you want less pop-up. I'm scoring each of these pieces at ½ inch, 1 inch, and 1½ inches. So again, this is 1 inch by 2 inch piece of white cardstock. I'm scoring at ½ inch, 1 inch, and 1½ inches, and then doing an accordion fold. So you get what looks like an M from the side. You can see the piece standing on my desk there. So we'll have 2 pieces that look exactly the same. Now it's time to add these 2 pop-up pieces. They're kind of like paper springs onto our pop-up feature on the card. So on one of the flaps of this little spring, I'll put some liquid adhesive, and then I will place that about 1/4 inch from that center fold line on the bigger label pieces. So you can see how it kind of sticks out there. It looks a little funny, but I promise it'll work really well. I will then do the same thing on the other side. So I'll put adhesive on one of the flaps and place it down on the other side about 1/4 inch from that folded line down the center of our card. So now we have these 2 like paper springs sticking out from those flaps on the front of our card. And again, notice how much dimension mine gives. That's because I'm using very heavyweight, 110-pound Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. It's very heavyweight. If you want less pop-up, you can use a lighter weight cardstock. Now onto those top 2 flaps, I put adhesive And now I'm placing onto that a large label die cut that I created from white cardstock, just making sure it's centered up. And you can see how much that pops up in the center. Now onto that, I will place one of the label die cuts that's a bit smaller with the faux stitching. Again, this could be skipped if you wanted to, but I like that faux stitching and layering detail. So here's what we have. You can see it flattens to go into an envelope, but when you take it out, it pops up and gives you a huge amount of dimension. Now, I like this look of having something that pops out from the card. It looks really cool on display. You could also orient this so that it is on a landscape card, and you could also use other shaped dies. You just want to make sure that your die is symmetrical. All right, so now we have our pop-up feature on our card. Let's create that layered snowflake and sentiment for the center. So I have my foiled snowflakes that I created earlier, and I also cut some snowflakes from silver glitter cardstock because I wasn't sure how I wanted to layer them together, and I will just save the extras for another card. Now I wanted to layer 3 snowflakes together, but this third snowflake that's on the top, I wanted it to be smaller so it didn't cover up as much of the other. So I just cut some of the little pieces sticking out so that I have a tiny little snowflake for the third layer at the center. Now, when I layer die cuts like this, I like to add some dimension to them, but you could totally skip it. What I did is I cut a white snowflake and I glued it to the back of my pretty snowflakes so it was stacked a little bit, and then I glued them together. So you'll see here I have my final snowflake layer, that little one that we cut up. I'll glue that onto a solid white one and then trim the excess off of the white. Now, again, if you don't want bulk, you can skip these layers. I just love the look of that additional dimension when I'm stacking die cuts like this. I just think it gives beautiful results. And so when I put this together, I have a foiled blue snowflake in the back, a silver glitter cardstock snowflake in the middle, and then this small foiled blue one at the front. And I love this layered look. And again, this is the Gina K Designs Snowflake Trio die set. It's an oldie but goodie. Now I can glue that layered snowflake right onto our pop-up feature. Really, you can put anything on that pop-up feature. Now it's time for our sentiment. I wanted something small that didn't cover up too much of the snowflake, but bold enough that you would see it. So I am using the Gina K Designs All at Once greeting die. You can see it over there on the right. She has come out with several All at Once stamps that go with this greeting die, and it works wonderfully. This is the All at Once Holiday Season stamp. Now see how it's one big stamp with lots of sentiments on it? You stamp them all at once, and then you can die cut them all at once using the die. So here I have a piece of black glossy cardstock. I'm placing that large greeting stamp onto it, and then I will stamp with Versamark ink. I'll make sure to use anti-static powder tool first. So I stamp that with Versamark ink. Any embossing ink would work here. And then I will rotate my cardstock and stamp it again. Since I already have my stamp and my MISTI and enough cardstock here, I might as well do 2 rounds so I have sentiments for later. At this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted a black sentiment strip with white letters or a white sentiment strip with black letters. So I'm placing white cardstock into my MISTI and I'm stamping these sentiments with black ink. That way I can cut all of them, pick which one works best on this card, and save the rest for later. So onto the black glossy where we stamped the clear embossing ink, I'm adding white embossing powder and heat setting it. And then I will cut this in half and run it through my Intri-Cut die cut machine with the All at Once die. So this is the Gina K Intri-Cut die cut machine. I have my magnetic platform in there. This will hold the die in place as I run it through. This die cut machine is wonderful because it has dials on the outside so that you don't have to have a bunch of plates. The plates are the same no matter what you're doing. You just adjust the dials on the side. I have a video talking all about this die cut machine and I'll link it up here on the top right. So I did that with all of my stamping, and look at all of these greetings I have. I chose to go with the black sentiment strip that has the white winter wishes. I felt that stood out the best on the card. On the back, I'm putting 2 just leftover white cardstock strips that were going to end up in the trash, but instead they're providing some strong dimension behind my sentiment. Again, you can skip those layers if you don't want that dimension. I'll now put glue on the back of this and add it right to the focal point center of my snowflake. You could put it below our pop-up feature, but I really like my sentiment to be in the focal point. Next, I have a navy envelope from Gina K Designs, and I'm placing a Simon Says Stamp placement guide in underneath the flap. I want to stamp this background stamp on the flap alone, so that placement guide will protect the rest of the envelope. This is the Gina K Designs Snowflake background stamp. It's wonderful, and it goes really nicely with the card that we created. I stamped that within the navy ink, so it's just a subtle tone-on-tone snowflake pattern. So here's our completed card. You can see it flattens to go into an envelope. As soon as you take it out, it pops up. And I love how it has a little wobble to it and that huge amount of pop-up dimension. So you can also see the beautiful foiling in the background thanks to that brilliant blue foiling in our fuse machine and the matching snowflake die cuts that I created using the solid poly-glaze in the same foil. Now this pop-up design you could do with lots of different cards, lots of different symmetrical large dies like the one I used here. And it's a great way to make a card that really stands out on display and surprises the recipient. I'll be sure to make more cards like this in future videos so you can get some more examples. My next example is another fun fold, but this time we have like kind of a double tri-fold card design. Not really sure what to call it, but it was really easy to create. Now for this one, I will be using the older Gina K Designs Breath of Sunshine stamps and coordinating dies. I love this set. I've used it before in videos. It's an older one, but definitely another goodie. I'm using the floral images to create a rainbow of flowers across my card. So I need to create a bunch of them. I've put the first layer of the front-facing and side-facing flower into my MISTI stamping tool. I'm stamping them at the top of this piece of white cardstock. This time I'm using light orchid ink, but stamping it a few times to make it a bit darker. I will then rotate my cardstock and stamp these flowers again, but this time with light lilac ink. So I continued to do this on more pieces of cardstock with additional colors so that I had 6 or 7 different colors of flowers to choose from. I ended up using 6 in the end, but did 7 just in case. So I did a whole rainbow using all Gina K Designs inks. Because these are layering stamps, I'm going to let that first layer of ink kind of settle in before I add the second layer. So I'll move on to the leaves and then come back to the flowers. So I have the first layer of the leaf and actually the center of the flower that I'm placing into my MISTI. I'm inking up the leaf with Jelly Bean Green ink and then the center of the flower with Sweet Mango. Now, I originally thought that I was going to do the center of the flower separately, die cut it out, and then pop it up into the center of the flowers. I end up changing my mind. So you see me do the center separately, but later I'll go and add it directly into the center of the flowers. I change my mind a lot when I'm crafting. Usually I can edit it out, but here I wasn't able to. After I did a bunch of leaves, I will go ahead and add the second layer to my flowers. So this adds just details towards the center. I'll place it on top of my orange ones here, and I'll stamp with a darker color in the same color family. So this time I'm using Tangerine Twist. I used Sweet Mango on the bottom layer. Now this gives beautiful detail. Look how fun that is. Then I can rotate my cardstock, clean off my stamp, and do it on the other side. So I can continue to add these details very quickly to all of our different color flowers, just using a slightly darker ink shade. Now we can go back to the leaves and add the second layer onto it. These are really easy to line up. This time I will stamp with Lucky Clover Green, which is a fun, happy Kelly green from Gina K Designs. And I'll stamp that on all of my leaves. Again, ignore those circles there in the center. I'm not going to use them today. Instead, I'll add the centers directly to the flowers here in a moment. So after I've stamped all of my leaves, I can start doing the flower centers. For the flower center, I brought in a Hero Arts ink. This is the caramel ink. I thought that would look nice there. And this ink pad's getting a little dry, so I had to stamp it a few times. After I did that at the center of all of my flowers, I really wasn't sure what details I wanted to add. In the layering stamp set, There are different options to add on top of these flower centers. I wanted the dots, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do them in a darker brown or in a black or in white. I tried many things, but in the end, I decided to do gold heat embossing. So when I stamped my first layer of the center flowers, I did want that to dry completely before I moved to heat embossing, so I heat set it with my heat gun. Now that I'm sure all of that ink is dry, I will use my anti-static powder tool, line up the little dot images that go at the center of the flowers, and stamp them with clear embossing ink. After I've stamped them with clear embossing ink, I'll rotate the paper in my MISTI and stamp the other flowers. Then I can add gold glitter embossing powder to all of the flower centers and heat set it. This will give us some gold sparkle at the center of each of our flowers. Once I've completed all the flowers, I'll use the coordinating die to cut them out along with the leaves. After I've done all my die cutting, look at this rainbow collection of flowers and leaves that we can add to our card. I definitely have more than I need for my card, but I'll be able to save the extras for another card in the future. Now I can do my card base. I'm starting with a piece of heavyweight craft cardstock that is 10 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. Before I do the fun folds, I thought it'd be fun to add some inking using a stencil. I'm using an older Gina K Designs Foliage stencil, and I'm inking over it with Gina K Designs white pigment ink. I'm using a Tim Holtz ink applicator to kind of pounce that ink over the stencil. I find this gives beautiful soft results, and I love the white ink on the craft cardstock. Now you could do any kind of stamping here that you want, but I decided to just repeat this pattern over the whole cardstock piece. I did heat set in between each time I moved the stencil just to make sure I didn't smear any of the ink, as pigment ink does stay wet for a while, so you want to heat set it before moving on. I continued to ink over the stencil until I covered the entire piece, and then some of those leftover nooks and crannies, I just used the corner of the stencil, these little leaves, to fill in those empty gaps. Then when done stenciling the whole piece, I did heat set it completely. For this fun fold, we'll have to do 2 score lines on this piece. The first one is at 3 inches and the second one is at 6 inches. When we fold along these score lines, we can get a Z fold card base. And when this is folded down, the overall size of this card is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now remember the Master Layouts 10 die set I used on my first card? I'm using it again on this card. I'm using the long rectangle that has the faux stitching on the inside edge. It works perfect for this card. So I'm taping that onto a piece of white cardstock, but sometimes this die might be longer than your die cutting plate. So I thought I'd show you a hack. What I do is I place most of the die, I have some of it hanging out the end, onto my cutting plate and I run it through. But I don't go all the way through. I stop short of the end of the die cut machine. So I'm going to stop there and then I'll rotate back. So I'm really just cutting part of this die. Then I will take it out, rotate that cardstock and die so that the other end is going in, put the cutting plate on top of it, and do the same thing once again. This way I will die cut the 2 halves of this large die and end up with the whole piece cut in the end. This is a great trick whenever you have a die that is too long to fit on your cutting plates. I actually think I could have fit this one in there on these cutting plates, but I thought I'd show you the trick just in case you couldn't do so on your machine. Now I have that die cut piece and I'm doing a score line at 2 3/4 inches. And then I'll rotate the piece and do a score line at 2 3/4 inches from the other end. Again, this has that faux stitching on the edge, which gives it a nice finished look. I will once again fold along those score lines to create a Z-fold piece. And here's what that piece looks like from the side. Now we need to add this on to our craft card base. So just watch along. It's a little hard to describe, but it's better to just watch to see how it comes together. So onto the back flap of my white Z-fold piece, I'll put some strong liquid adhesive. This is Gina K Connect. I recommend liquid adhesive so you can wiggle it into the right place. I will then hook the Z's together, as you see me doing here, and then press it all down so that the fold on the white flap there on the right lines up with the right edge of the craft note card. So you'll see how it's glued there onto the inside of the card about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So you can see how the two Z folds kind of line up with each other there. Now I will put liquid adhesive on the back side of this flap here and a little bit along the folded edge of that craft note card. Then I'll close everything down onto each other, and you can see how the card will look like when the card is flattened. And then you can see how it pops up nicely and you have that fun fold card. Again, I do recommend liquid adhesive to assemble this so you can wiggle it until it's right in place. And look at how much fun this is. Now you can add anything you want to this. I like to add something to the left area and to the right area of that white rectangle, but I leave the center area open to write my personal message. I'm using my magnets with my glass magnetic work surface to hold that down as I arrange my die cuts. I also need a sentiment, so I'm using the new Gina K Designs Elegant Thoughts stamp set. This, at the time of putting up this video, is the free gift that you get with $75 and over at the Gina K Designs website. It will be for sale later on, and there are coordinating dies available for purchase. So I stamped Grateful for You with black ink on white cardstock and used the coordinating die to cut it out. I glued 2 extra white die cuts behind it for stability. Now I'm just arranging things. Again, I like to keep that center white area between the 2 score lines empty so that I can write my personal message there, but you could also decorate it if you prefer. Now I'm starting to glue the elements down. I will glue all the flowers down directly onto the card using liquid adhesive, but that Grateful for You, I will put 1 foam dot on the back of. That way I can tuck leaves and flowers underneath it. Because I stacked that Grateful for You die cut, it's strong enough that it won't get crushed even with just 1 foam square behind it. Now I'm adding little green leaves tucked here and there behind my flowers, using my magnets to keep the card closed so I can make sure I stay within the outside edge of the card so it'll fit into an envelope. Then I can open up the card and add my flowers to the inside. Now, when I add these on to this area here on the right, you want to make sure you don't put anything over the score line on that side because then it'll get folded up when you close your card. So I'm putting everything just between that right score line and the right edge of the white rectangle. I did add some gold sequins here and there and finished adding all my flowers and leaves, and there you can see the completed card design. There's plenty of room to write a personal message on the inside. This stands very nicely on display, and I have a rainbow of flowers going across my card. I chose to use mostly old Gina K Design supplies for this card. However, you could change it up and use any supplies. You could make a fun holiday card design, birthday card design, anything you want. I really hope you enjoyed these 2 fun fold card designs. Be sure again to check out the live that I did with Gina because she has additional ideas for you in that also. If you're interested in the supplies that I use, they are linked in my YouTube description below. You can also check out the 2 related videos I have linked here at the end. I really do appreciate the time that you spend here with me. If you don't mind, please give this video a thumbs up because that way YouTube knows that they can share my videos with other viewers and we can get more people crafting. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.